Welcome back to Microeconomics. I'm Keith Yakucha. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the firm and their customers. We're going to be taking a look at this idea of profit maximization, how firms choose their price, how firms decide how much stuff to produce, and taking a look really at the inner workings of the revenue cost side of the firm's decision-making process. We'll start off by taking a look at the revenue side, which is going to be attached to the firm's production function. And then from there, we'll see how that production function filters through to affect the costs of the firm, bringing those two together, of course, to then take a look at profit. What I want you to recognize as we go through this is it's pulling forward many topics we've already evaluated. It's going to be pulling forward topics of the production function, of these diminishing average products of labor. It's going to be pulling forward our budget constraint and the income substitution effect as we switch between one good and another good, given the change in prices. So that's what we're going to get through in this video. Let's go jump over and get started and have a look. So let's start off by taking a look at what we mean by profit. So altogether, I'll use pi as our denotation for profit. You can think about it as the size of your pie. The bigger the pie, the bigger the profit. Altogether, the way that we define profit is our total revenue, so all the money we bring in, minus our total cost. So hey, all of our money that we bring in, all of the money that we make, minus all the money we have to spend to make the thing. To open this up, we can go and say, hey, profit is, well, let's open up total revenue. Looks quite simple, just price times our quantity. Well, okay, this is actually where things are going to get a little bit complex. And that is because, well, where does price come from? If I'm selling cups of coffee, could I start charging $100 per cup of coffee? I mean, if I could, maybe that's great, but would I sell very many cups? So one of the things we have to end up taking a look at is, well, what is the feasible prices that are available to us? And thus what we'd be taking a look at is a feasibility set, and we'll build that up. The other side we're going to take a look at is our production side. So this is a production function, which really is ultimately just a function given some level of technology of our labor and capital. That is all the machines, all the workers that we have available to us, and how we could put them together at the lowest cost in order to produce some level of output. Okay, what I want to do is start off with taking a look at this production function. We've already done this, but just to explicitly link it back to where we're talking about. And let's take a look. So we have our axes. Let's say that this axis here, this is our total product, our Q, the amount of stuff we're producing. Here on the horizontal is our number of workers. And what we would expect is something like this to be our production function. That is, as we add more and more workers, initially, let me just change colors here so we can see it. Initially, from the origin to any point, we witness that we have these increasing average products. That is, hey, our output per worker initially is getting bigger, 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 bigger. But then we hit this inflection point, and at that inflection point, it starts to become that our output per worker, that's our average product of labor, starts to decrease, get smaller, smaller, and smaller. Remember, the reason why I'm doing these series of lines is that we can always kind of visualize or conceptualize the average product of labor as the slope of a ray from any point to the origin. And that's because the average product of labor is just the total output here, Q, per worker. What is our output per worker? That is the average product of labor. So what we can do then is we can think about this and why? Why do we have this? Well, okay, let's imagine, let's keep up this coffee shop example. So we have a coffee shop. Initially, there is some amount of workers. We'll say we have some fixed amount of capital. We just have 100 units of capital, whatever that means. And then we have the number of cups that we can make as a result, the number of cups of coffee we can produce. Well, let's say we have one worker. Well, this one worker, what's going on? They have to run the cash register. They then have to, once they get the order, go to the coffee pot, pour the coffee. They have to go to the espresso machine, make the espresso. Maybe they're only capable of making 10 cups of coffee over some time period. But hey, what happens? We add a second worker. This second worker that we now add for a fixed amount of capital, we are now allowed to have a bit of specialization. Maybe you, the first worker, worked the cashier. The second worker now just does all the drink prep, goes and does the drip coffee, works the espresso machine, all the rest. So as a result of that, we'll say that our output increases to 30 cups of coffee over this time period. Well, this is great. We added one worker, so we doubled our workers and we tripled our output. That's awesome. Let's keep going. Say we add a third worker. Again, we're doing this for the same amount of capital altogether. So this third worker, let's say that this brings us up all the way to 60. Again, this is looking pretty awesome. We're adding more workers. Each worker kind of specializes into their task, and we're getting a boost in our output as a result. Then we add our fourth. Well, here's the problem. The first worker was able to work the cashier. The second worker was able to jump between the espresso machine and the coffee pots. When we added the third worker, now we had one just doing the espresso machine, one just doing the coffee pot, one just doing the cash register. This fourth worker, again, for a fixed amount of capital, doesn't really have anything for them to do. They can't just will coffee into existence. There's not a piece of capital for them to work with to add more cups of coffee. Now, mind you, it could be a situation where, hey, as the second worker steps away from the coffee pot, the fourth worker could step in. As the third worker is doing one part on the espresso machine, the fourth one can do something else. Or, of course, we just recognize that, hey, they need to take breaks. And so when they take breaks, the fourth worker can step in as well. What I want you to keep in mind here is that, yes, this fourth worker allows us to produce more cups of coffee, but we're not going to see these drastic jumps anymore like we did, because we're now kind of at this point of congestion. We're congested. There's not the capital for us to imbue with. So let's say it still goes up, but let's say it only goes up now to something like 80. We add our fifth, and let's say that our fifth worker brings us up to 90. We'll do our sixth worker, and we'll say that our sixth worker brings us up to something 96. And then finally, we'll say we add our seventh worker, and let's say that our seventh worker is able to bring us up to 98. Again, what I want you to see is, yes, as we keep adding more and more and more workers, we're able to produce more and more and more output, but we're having this decreasing rate. That is, if we take a look at our production function, we're starting to flatten off here. We're not getting that big boost in output for the additional worker like we used to. Okay, well, how does this relate to this? Well, let's go and make that comparison. I'm just going to move this graph over a little bit. Okay, what we can take a look at is our average product of labor, average product, just like we were looking at before. And this is output per worker. So, hey, 10 over 1, let's be clear. It looks like these are negatives. We can't have negative workers. Those were just my highlight marks, so they're not negatives. But 10 over 1, we have an output per worker of 10 cups of coffee per person. 30 over 2, we have an output per worker of 15 cups per person. 60 over 3, we get 20. 80 over 4, we're still at 20. And then we start to get 90 divided by 5. That drops us down to 18. 96 over 6. 96 cups of coffee per 6 workers gives us 16. And then finally, 98 over 7 gives us an output per worker of 14 cups of coffee per worker. So similar to what we were saying with this production function, initially our average product of labor is growing. It hits this inflection point where it's peaked, and then it begins to fall. That is, if you can see it here, those yellow lines were when the average product of labor was getting bigger, steeper lines. We hit our inflection point around here, and then thereafter, every additional worker we added, that slope, that average product of labor, got shallower, shallower, and shallower. So diminishing average returns once we get beyond this point of congestion. Keep in mind, in a large firm, we would typically expect that we would need more than the amount of workers such that we're experiencing diminishing average returns. We would expect this to take place. One of the other terms we can take a look at is what we would call our marginal product of labor. And this has been alluded to so far, but never explicitly determined. And yes, our marginal product of labor, again, as we've alluded to it, it is just the slope of this production function as we go through. But we don't have calculus skills right now, so we're not going to get that slope in this way, but we can get it in a bit of a different way. And that is when we're talking about the marginal product, we're saying what is the change in our product? What's our change in our output for a change in our input? So if I add an additional worker, how many more cups of coffee do I get for that additional worker? And let's go work through that. So nothing for the first one here because, well, we don't have any workers below 1. I guess we could say, hey, we had 0 before, 0 to 1 gave us 10, but let's just start with this one here. So we added plus 1 worker. As a result of that, we got plus 20 output. So our extra output for an extra worker was 20 marginal product of labor. We got an extra 20 cups of coffee for that additional worker. Here, we added an additional worker, another plus 1 worker, and we got an additional 30 cups. So our marginal product of labor is 30. Then we added from 3 to 4 an additional 1. In this case, we got 60 to 80, only an additional 20. Oh, we see that our marginal product of labor peaked. And then now as we carry on, 4 to 5, an additional worker, output increased by 10. So there's my marginal product of labor. 5 to 6, an additional worker gave us only an additional 6 cups of coffee. And then finally, 6 to 7, an additional worker only gave us an additional 2 cups of coffee. So what we witness is that we don't just have diminishing average product, but we also have diminishing marginal products. And we've typically looked at it in this term here, but what we could take a look at is actually take a look at what I'd call our product curves, which is just the relationship between this average and marginal product. And what do we get with that? Let me just scroll down a little bit. There we go. We'll work over here somewhere. Change our colors to white. And what we can take a look at is, again, let's make that our white as well. We could take a look at our output per worker as our vertical axes, and we want to do that with respect to number of workers. What we see if we start off with our average product of labor is that our average product of labor starts at some point, goes up, hits a maximum, and then begins to fall, and then kind of just levels off altogether. So that's our average product of labor. Just seeing what we've seen here. Again, we kind of have that where the average product of labor was initially getting steeper and steeper, hit the maximum, and then we had diminishing average returns thereafter. Let's change to red to match our marginal product of labor. And what we see with the marginal product of labor is that, again, it quickly peaks. It peaks sooner and then begins to rapidly fall. The way that this guy goes is it actually starts above our average product, goes up, hits that peak, and then drops down through. Let's do a bit better than that. Goes up, peaks, drops down through the maximum average product of labor, and then carries on downward underneath. And that is our marginal product of labor. Again, why does it have to have this relationship? Why was I so specific about it needs to cross right at the maximum average product of labor? Well, that's just entirely mathematical relationship. As long as the extra output for an extra worker is greater than the average output per worker, well, that extra worker is going to be bringing up the average, bringing up the average. Then we hit a maximum. As soon as we're at that maximum and you add an extra worker, but the output from that extra worker is less than the average, it's going to start to bring down the average. Maybe that's a little bit abstract. Let's think about it in a different way. Let's think about it in terms of your grades. Okay, your grades altogether are just an average of all the assignments, all of the quizzes, all of that you've done. So that's like our average product of labor. Let's suppose that you're sitting at a grade right now of 65. Then you go and you do an extra quiz. So that would be a marginal quiz. You've gone and done an extra quiz and gotten an extra grade. In this case here, let's say that on this quiz, let's write this here. The quiz, this is kind of our allegory to the marginal product of labor. On this quiz, you get a mark of 70. Well, if the extra quiz gave you an extra grade of 70, that's going to pull up your average grade. So as long as that marginal grade is higher than the average grade, it's getting pulled up. Let's make that 70 in red so we can differentiate, make sure that we're clear when we're talking about a marginal there. So that's pulling up, which would say bring you up to 68. Then you go and do another marginal quiz. And on this one, you again get 70. So again, you get 70. That's again pulling you up to, let's say it pulls your average grade up to 70 now. And then let's carry on. Again, another 70. If anything, you're consistent, so that's great. And then, but hey, look at this. Your average grade was 70. Your marginal grade is 70. You're no longer pulling up your average, you're just maintaining it. So there you go. Your average is being maintained at 70. Now you go do yet another quiz. Well, let's say this one here doesn't go so well. It's a harder topic. How does that go? Let's suppose on this quiz you only get a 60. Well, if you only get a 60 on this next quiz, your average grade is 70, but the extra quiz that you did, giving you an extra grade of 60, this is going to start to pull down your average. And so this starts to pull down your average to, let's say, 67. As long as the marginal grade that you get is below the average, your average grade will be getting pulled down. As long as your marginal grade is above the average, well, then your average grade will be getting pulled up. And so that's exactly what we're seeing here. As long as the marginal is above the average is being pulled up. When they're equal, well, they have to cross at the maximum point because as soon as the marginal is below the average has to be starting to be pulled down and diminishing. So stable relationship, initially spiking marginal product, hits our maximum, and then decreasing thereafter. Okay, this is our idea as to our basic understanding of our production function. This really was covered many chapters ago. It was just to refresh ourselves to say, hey, when we are talking about our production here, we are talking about a production function altogether, such that this production function has these diminishing average and marginal returns to labor. And that's the big outcome for our production side. Let's go take a look at price, the feasibility set. And on this side, what I was referring to was this idea that, hey, could we charge $100 for our cup of coffee? Could I charge $1? Could I charge $3? Could I charge $5? What are the different rates of prices that I could charge for that cup of coffee? Let's quickly clean this up, and then we'll take a look at how we determine this feasibility set for our prices. Okay, so for our prices, we want to determine what is our feasible price such that people will actually buy it, right? We could set a price a cup of coffee at $1,000 a cup, and cool, maybe we'd make a lot of revenue if we could sell even a single cup, but maybe no one wants to buy cups of coffee for $1,000 a cup. So we need to be a little bit feasible with this price. Again, this is just going to be pulling forward from a previous chapter, and that is taking a look at another feasibility set, which was just our budget constraint and our indifference curve. And based off of that, what is our optimal consumption bundle such that we're choosing between, I don't know, coffee and scones to get to the highest possible level of indifference? Let's take a look at an example trying to evaluate this. Okay, so let's say that we have coffee and we have scones. And if we wanted to, let's just subscript that as C, subscript that as S, so I don't have to keep writing them each time. Let's suppose that right now, just to give it some context, that we have a budget of $20. The price of coffee is, let's say, $2. And the price of a scone is, I don't know, let's say the price of a scone is going to be $4. Okay, in creating our budget constraint, one of the first things we want to take a look at is we can say, well, how much coffee could I consume if I put that entire $20 just into coffee? Well, if I only bought coffee, the quantity of coffee that I could have would be the entirety of this $20 into coffee, 20 divided by 2. I could buy 10 cups of coffee. Now I could write a better 10 than that. Let me try that again. There we go. So something like, let's say something like this. 10 cups of coffee. If I were to only be buying coffee, 0 scones at all. The flip side, what if I were to only be buying scones, no coffee at all? What would be my highest quantity of scones that I could purchase altogether? Well, again, same kind of idea. We could go 20 divided by 4, and that would give us that we could buy 5 scones. So there we go. Those are our two extremes for our $20. If we connect the two, we get our budget constraint. This is again our feasibility set, our feasible ways that we could spend this $20, and all the possible different combinations of coffee and scones that would be available to us. Of course, which combination do we choose altogether? Well, we choose the one that gives us the highest level of utility, the highest indifference curve. So let's throw on some notional indifference curve such that we have preferences between both coffee and scones. Okay, let's say we have something like that. So at this point, let's say that is, and again, I'm just entirely making these numbers up. Let's say that that means that we have 3 scones. If we have 3 scones, that gives us what? 3 times the price of scones being 4. So we're spending $12 altogether on scones. So that means we have $8 left over for coffee. That means that if we have $8 left over for coffee at $2 per cup, that means we're having about 4 cups of coffee. Great. So we have our initial level of consumption given this. And you might be like, Keith, where are we going? We were trying to find our feasibility set for coffee, and instead we're taking a look at our budgets. We're taking a look at coffee and scones. Just hold on with me for a second here. What we want to see is what happens as the price of coffee changes. And as we go through these changes in the price of coffee, where do our quantities change? Because that's going to then be able to influence how many different things we could sell at different prices altogether. And so let's suppose that coffee gets cheaper. Let's suppose that the price of coffee, you know what, let's change colors to make this a little bit more bold. Let's suppose that the price of coffee falls. It's now cheaper. It's now only $1 per cup of coffee. We're still the same price for a scone, still $4 for a scone. Well, what happens? The total amount of coffee I could buy if I went all in on coffee Instead of being able to buy 10 cups of coffee, I can now buy 20 cups of coffee. So that's going to be, we could say notionally something like that is 20. And if we were to draw that new budget constraint going from maximum amount of coffee to, well, we could still only buy 5 scones because price of scones are the same, we would get a budget constraint that looks like this. So what we've seen is that that budget constraint has rotated outwards because we can buy more cups of coffee, same number of scones, and as we go through this whole process, just like we were before, we would know that we would have both an income and a substitution effect between this whole thing going on. So let's take a look. Let's evaluate that. So first thing, let's find where this new point would be. Let's just drift this indifference curve out to the right. And there we go. Somewhere around there, we can say. Let's, right there. Somewhere like there, I'll call that point C. That is our new final bit that we'll end up on, such that we're just on the indifference curve. And so as a result, A to C would be our overall effect. But of course, right, we said, okay, let's decompose this into our two parts, our income and our substitution effect. So let's take a look at that. The first bit being our income effect. Let me write this over here. The income effect is saying, well, hey, the reason we were able to get over to this higher bit is because the price of coffee went down. That is, because the price of coffee went down, we're now able to buy more of everything. This, in a lot of ways, feels like our income has gone up because our real consumption, the amount of things that we can buy, is now higher. So this feels like our income has increased. Okay? If your income increases, what do you want? Well, typically, if your income goes up, you want more of everything. And we see this. We see that we would have more scones as well as more coffee as a result. How do we showcase this? Well, income effect would be saying, how could we get up here without the change in those relative prices? And that would be, let's just duplicate our existing budget constraint here. Let's change it so that it's dotted, so it differentiates. We would just say, let's slide that guy out, and where that just touches all together. We see in this, it's pretty darn close to C where we ended up, but let's just put it a little bit away, right there, such that we have that white line and that white line. That would be our income effect in each case, such that we're saying, okay, if we just had enough money just given to us, no change in prices to get to this area, where would we be? How would we get there? And exactly, we would have more scones if I had more money, and I would have more coffee if I had more money. But keep in mind, my coffee only goes to about this point here. Scones goes quite far. Okay, we then have our substitution effect. With our substitution effect, let me use green for substitution effect. With our substitution effect, we have our point that we're at. But if we take a look at this, well, okay, right now we're at the indifference curve, so we have some marginal rate of substitution, but we have a much steeper budget constraint. So we have a much steeper budget constraint, so we have our marginal rate of transformation that's higher. And then we can go through and equalize this and see where that goes through. And what I'm going to do is go through this two ways. I'm going to talk through this whole MRS, MRT, and how we re-equalize to ultimately get to point C. But I'll be honest, many people just get lost in this. So then I'm going to talk about it in just plain language, the way that we would actually deal with this typically as consumers, and how you're pretty intuitively actually going to respond to this. So let's start off. MRS. Well, what the heck is our MRS? It's our slope. It's our willingness to substitute between coffee and scones. So that there is going to be the change in coffee or a change in scones. And let's say, just give it some number, just so that we can contextualize it. Let's say that we are willing to give up 2 coffee in order to get plus 1 scone. Our marginal rate of transformation, this is based off of our feasibility set. It's what we're actually capable of transforming in our switch between coffee and scones. And our marginal rate of transformation is bigger, we're saying. So let's say this is minus 4 coffee per scone. Okay. Well, if this is the case, if this is what's happening there altogether, then, well, how do we interpret this? How do we work through this? Let me get rid of that S. It looks like F5 and it's throwing me off. We've already just said that this is change in coffee for change in scone, and I didn't have the C anywhere else, so let's just keep it like that. Okay, so interpreting it, I would be willing to give up 2 cups of coffee in order to get a scone. However, I would have to give up 4 cups of coffee to get a scone. Should I get a scone? No. No, we should not get a scone because we're only willing to give up 2 and we'd have to give up 4. So it's not a good idea to go plus scones. Well, the other way we could think about this then is just flip the sides. We could get 2 cups of coffee if I give up 1 scone, or my ability, my transformation is I could gain 4 cups of coffee if I give up 1 scone. So again, starting off with the marginal rate of substitution, that's based off of our indifference curve. I would be maintaining my happiness if I were to gain 2 cups of coffee and lose a scone. However, I would be capable of gaining 4 cups of coffee if I lose a scone. Should I do it? Yes. Yes, you should do that. You are willing to give up a scone for 2 cups of coffee, but you're capable of giving up a scone for 4 cups of coffee. You're getting a lot more than what you're willing. That's a good thing. So in this case here, what do? You give up the scones, and as you give up the scones, you're going to move back to the left. That's going to be where we end up at our overall effect there at C. Okay, as we give up the scones, of course, if you're giving up a scone, what are you getting? You're getting coffee. So that is pushing up your coffee altogether. So we see initially the substitution effect was more coffee. Sorry, initially the income effect was more coffee. We're then going through our substitution effect, which is again more coffee. The two of those together was more coffee, more coffee. That is our outcome. Okay, but you're like, okay, Keith, you said you're going to make this a little bit more common sense, a little bit more intuitive. Maybe you're still lost between this whole MRS, MRT business. Okay, let's re-talk about it. Let's just get rid of this so I have some room to work with. Okay, let's think about the substitution effect from another angle. Right now, the price of coffee has gone down. The price of scones has stayed the same, unchanged. Okay, you want to get to the happiest place you can be, and you get happiness from a degree through your consumption of goods and services. It gives you satisfaction, it gives you utility. Well, if you want to get the highest utility that you can, should you buy more of the cheap good or more of the good that stayed the same? Well, you should be looking at that and you're like, well, wait, if I get satisfaction from consuming things and this has become cheaper, meaning I could consume more of it, I should increase my quantity of coffee which I'm consuming. If I'm increasing my quantity of coffee which I'm consuming, well, that must mean that we have to give up some scones because we have our rate of transformation along our feasibility set. So that is, we have to substitute away from scones towards coffee. So the impact of that, quantity of coffee up because coffee's cheaper, but in order to get more coffee, it means fewer scones altogether. Great. Whole bunch of background, income, substitution effect. You're still like, Keith, what does this have anything to do with this feasible price? Here's where we get to it. Here's where we get to it. What we've witnessed all together, maybe let's just change colors one more time. Let's go to blue. What we've witnessed all together is the price of coffee. Price of coffee went from $2 down to $1. So the price of coffee fell. As a result of this, through the income effect, our quantity of coffee went up. So, hey, price of coffee went down. This felt like we were richer. We could buy more things. So, from this income point of view, we're buying more coffee. Then, because price of coffee is cheaper, we want more of the cheaper thing typically. So, we substitute away from the expensive one towards the cheaper one. And again, we get more coffee. What we witness is quantity of coffee up. We see we get this inverse relationship between the price of a cup of coffee and the actual amount of coffee that we're consuming or wanting to consume. And we could figure out, based off of our indifference curves, what that actual change in the number of cups of coffee are. And then we could plot this. We could plot this and get something like the following. Let's just scroll down to make some space. So to plot this, and again, let's use white. We have price. Really, this is just dollars. We have quantity. In this case, it's quantity or cups of coffee. And initially, at a price of $2 per cup of coffee, we had, I don't know, something like this. That was where we were at $2 a cup of coffee. We had some quantity of coffee that we were consuming. Then we said, hey, price of coffee fell. Price of coffee fell to $1. And as the price of coffee fell to $1, what happened? Well, we had our income effect. Let's go and take a look at that. Our income effect said, hey, more coffee. There we go. So income effect brought us up to there. We then said, hey, coffee's cheaper, so let's substitute 2 more coffee away from the scones that are relatively more expensive. So we would have our substitution effect there. Both of these effects altogether give us, let's go back to white, at a price of 1, pushed us income effect, pushed us substitution effect. Both of them together for our overall effect gives us our new price and quantity combination. And what you can see there is we actually get we could extrapolate a line through these points such that we get this downward sloping relationship, this inverse relationship between the price of a good and the quantity which we consume, such that any change in price is decomposed into partly an income, partly a substitution effect. What do we call such a line? Well, what we call such a line is our demand. And this is our demand for coffee. Great. Now we can start using this to kind of create a feasibility set, figuring out what are the possible prices that we could charge for coffee as a firm. Because what I want you to keep in mind is if we go profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. So profit is P times Q minus total cost. Well, look at this. Price is determined based off of this demand curve, but even more so, yes, quantity has these diminishing average product of labor, diminishing marginal product of labor that we were looking at, but even more so, every price that we end up selling a cup of coffee for also gives me the amount of cups of coffee that people are actually wanting to buy. So this is going to then fuel into how many cups of coffee I could actually sell, not just how many I could produce. So we get entirely from our demand curve, our total revenue side of things, we get our feasibility set. If I were to set my price of a cup of coffee somewhere ridiculously up here at $1,000, well, what we see is that that is way beyond our feasibility set, way beyond our demand. Nobody would want to buy a cup of coffee there. Great, you could set that at 1,000, and as a result, your quantity would be 0. If you go and set a price at $1, well, great, that's right there. You're going to get some quantity, I don't know, let's make up a number. Let's say that's 15 cups of coffee, and you could get your total revenue there. So what we're trying to get away from this is that there is a feasibility set. This feasibility set is our demand for coffee. When we are determining the price that we sell our good for, that price that we sell our good for is then going to go through our demand to determine the quantity that we can ultimately sell this for. So we are constrained not just to pick a price and thus determine our profit, but we are constrained by this demand curve, the actual feasible combinations of prices and quantity available to us. So our demand is our feasibility set. Said that a few times now, but just really trying to drive that point home. So in the thin context then, up here, this got really messy, but we started off with our budget constraint. Again, our budget constraint was our feasibility set, our feasible combinations of coffee and scones that we could consume. And then we said, well, hey, which of the options along this feasibility set is optimal? Which of them would we actually want to be at? And of course, the result of that was, hey, we would want to be where our indifference curve is the highest it can be. That is where we've maximized our utility, maximized our satisfaction. The question being, given the constraint of my feasibility set, how do I get the highest combination of coffee and scones? Sorry, how do I get a combination of coffee and scones that gives me the highest level of utility, the highest level of happiness? And so we found where we have this meeting of our indifference curve, or again, you can think of it as your ISO happiness curve, the highest ISO happiness curve that you could obtain given the feasibility set of your budget constraint. We're ultimately going to want to do the same thing for the firm. The firm has this feasibility set of prices and quantities that they can sell their good for. And we want to figure out, hey, which price and quantity combination is best in order to maximize, get the highest level of profit that is possible. And the way that we can do this is very similar to what we did there. We can go and create an ISO profit curve. So ISO, same profit. And take a look at a variety of ISO profit curves. We've already taken a look at these in one space. Now we're taking a look at them in another space. And we're going to say, hey, what is the highest ISO profit curve that I could obtain given this price and quantity? That is, given this feasibility set, given this demand curve. In order to get to this ISO profit, we need to quickly open up total cost. To quickly open up total cost is a bit more than just quickly doing it, but we'll start off with the basics so that we can build this ISO profit. And then from building this ISO profit, we'll then dive a bit deeper into the cost side of the firm. So altogether, we could say profit is total revenue minus total cost. Let's go and do a little bit of I don't know, let's play around with this a little bit. Let's say that we want to figure out what is our profit per unit, what is our average profit, if you will. Well, so to get that profit per unit, that would be just going profit per unit sold, total revenue per unit sold, total cost per unit. This would be our unit cost. Let's carry on. Let's just move down so we can work through this. Okay, so we would get that our average profit, I'll just write that, that is also our profit per unit, would be our total revenue per unit. So total revenue, let's open that up. That's P times Q all over Q. Look at that, those Q's cancel each other out. Minus our unit cost, our total cost per unit. I'm going to call this our average total cost, our unit cost. Okay, to simplify this, we get that our profit per unit is equal to our price minus our average total cost. So, right, the amount that we get to sell a unit for minus our unit cost. Essentially, this is saying how much money are we making per cup of coffee? What is my profit per cup of coffee? From here, we can do one last little algebraic trick, and it's not really a trick, it's just, hey, let's isolate profit. And we can say that profit altogether is our profit per unit, profit per cup of coffee, times the number of cups of coffee that we sell. So what is the amount of money we're making per cup times the number of cups we sell altogether? Okay, went through this little bit of algebraic manipulation because it's just going to simplify things for us a little bit as we go and create these ISO profits. Let's presume to start us off that our average total cost is fixed. That is, we just have this constant unit cost of, let's say, $2 per cup of coffee. So, right, this would be your labor cost per cup of coffee. This would be your cost of your beans, your cost of your cream, cost of your milk, and a little bit of your amortized capital per cup. So, your unit cost, your cost per cup of coffee is $2. To then take a look at our ISO profits, let's start off with an easy one. We could take a look at an ISO profit when profit is 0. Well, when profit is 0, 0 equals price minus 2 times quantity. What we would want to do is take a look at all the possible combinations of P and Q such that we get profit of 0. And of course, should pop out at you, how do we get this to equal 0? Well, two options. Either quantity is 0, that is, we don't sell anything, but that's not really an interesting point to us. The other way that we could get a profit of 0 is if we're selling our cup of coffee for $2 per cup. If we're selling for $2 per cup, we're just breaking even. And so we are 2 minus 2 is 0 times Q, giving us 0 profit altogether. If we were to take a look at that, what does that isoprofit curve look like? We would have dollars on our vertical, quantity, the amount of units that we're producing, we're selling there on our horizontal. At every point where price is 2, we have 0 profit. So let's use yellow for this guy here. Helps if I use the right tool. There we go. We get something like that right there at 2 is an ISO profit of profit being $0. Every quantity that we produce gives us 0 profit. But then what happens is price begins to go up. Well, similarly, we could take a look at different combinations that give us profit. Let's change colors again so that we can be a little bit consistent and I'm not confusing us with saying, hey, 0 profit is yellow and then using that for a different color. Let's say that we want to take a look at a profit of 100. So if we want to take a look at a profit of 100, so all the different combinations of P and Q such that we could pull out 100 profit, well, that would be 100 is equal to, well, what are some of the ones that we could do? And again, we're not going to do an exhaustive list. There's an infinite number of P's and Q's that can make this happen. But just one that pops to mind for me would be, what if our price was 3 and we could sell a quantity of 100? So 3 minus 2, price of 3 minus the cost of 2 is $1 per cup. 100 cups, that gives us 100. Then, what else could we do? Well, we could have a bit of a lower price. We could say that we have a price of $2.50 minus 2. So we're now making 50 cents per cup. As a result, we would have to sell 200 cups of coffee. We could also have a price of 4. Well, we're now making $2 per cup, meaning we'd only have to sell 50 cups of coffee. What we get all together with this, if you kind of see, when the price is higher, the amount of cups we have to sell is lower to still maintain that isoprofit. As the price gets closer to our average total cost, we need more cups of coffee sold in order to match that fixed isoprofit. The result is we get isoprofit curves that look something like that. And we'd say, hey, this is our isoprofit for 100. We could keep going with different ones. We could go and say, let's go to maybe a pinky color here. There would be some isoprofit of maybe 300. And then we'll do one more. Let's go with red. Is that orange? I don't know. Maybe it's red. And maybe that's something like a profit of 500. Well, what we're seeing is that we get some minimum profit when profit equals 0. Mind you, you could have negative profit, so we could technically go lower. But as we go up to the right, our profit grows. And as we go down to the left, our profit shrinks. Ultimately, we're going to want to obtain the highest level of profit that we can. One of our key assumptions of a firm is that they exist. Their purpose is to maximize their profit. So they want to obtain the highest ISO profit they possibly can. How do they do that? Well, they're going to pick the highest ISO profit they can given their feasibility set, given their demand curve. And so what we could do is just come down here. We could overlay some demand curve. Let's overlay a demand curve in white since I don't have that color. And let's say that we have a demand curve as follows. There we go. We have our downward sloping demand. What we see is that right here, we are on our profit of 100, such that we have a high price of a cup of coffee and a low number of cups of coffee being sold. Similarly, we have another profit of 100, such that we're selling lots of cups of coffee, but we're selling them at a lower price. The firm would be indifferent between these 2 points, A and B, because they're on the same isoprofit. The firm is earning a $100 of profit at both of them. So it doesn't really matter. There's no difference between these 2 points from the firm's perspective. Would be just as happy at either one. But what we see is that if the firm moves to the right of A or moves to the left of B, there would be some isoprofit that would be coming through here that would be up to the right of this profit 100. And let's see, let's make a color for this. Let's go darker green. Why not? We could presume that this new isoprofit comes through somewhere like this. If that's 300, this is 100. Let's say that's profit of 180, just to pick a fun number. And what we see is, hey, just touches only at one point, such that this is the highest possible isoprofit curve that is even touching this demand curve. And what we get is our highest total profit that is possible to be obtained. We get Q star, our profit maximizing quantity, and we get P, the corresponding price that we would then sell this good or service for in order to obtain this highest level of profit available to us. So again, just like we did in every other chapter up until this point, we've identified a feasibility set. Given that feasibility set, we've said, okay, what are a bunch of points that we're indifferent between? And then how do we get to the highest possible indifference curve, the highest possible ISO curve, such that we are the best off that we could be? In the context of the firm here, we said our feasibility set is our demand curve. These are the possible combinations of P and Q available to us. Given that feasibility set, we're constrained by those P's and Q's. What is the highest possible level of profit that we could obtain given that? And that is where the feasibility set just touches our ISO profit. Again, at that point, just like in every other case, that marginal rate of substitution is equal to that marginal rate of transformation. The marginal rate of transformation is our ability to transform dollars into output. So the rate that we switch between money and output. And the marginal rate of substitution is the rate that we would be willing to switch P for Q in order to maintain some fixed level of profit. So substitution, our willingness to switch between the two to maintain our profit. Marginal rate of transformation, the rate in which we do that we're capable of transforming P to Q. Same kind of concept, just in a different format. Okay, we're going to wrap up here for this video. What I want to do is take a pause. We're then going to take a look at another video that's going to get into more detail into the cost side of the firm. And as we get into more detail on this cost side of the firm, it gives us another way to evaluate this and another way to think about where we determine this Q star, where we determine this optimal price. There will be a third video in this series as well. The third video is going to get deeper into this whole demand curve side of things and how different shapes of demand curves, different properties of this demand curve are going to influence not just the price, but also our quantity and the overall efficiency of this firm and their ability to provide goods and services in what we would call an allocatively efficient manner. So 2 more videos on this topic, but this does us for the initial one, taking a look at our feasibility set of our demand curve and our isoprofit, finding some profit maximizing point. Till next time.